स्वर्ग संसार अति उच्चतम जीवन बने परमार्थमय व्यवहार हो। ना हम रहे अपने लिए, हमको सभी से गर्ज है। गुरुदेव ये आशीष दे, जो सोचने का फर्ज है। हम हो पुजारी तत्व के, गुरुदेव के आदेश के, सच प्रेम के निकलेम के, सधर्म के सत्कर्म के, ऊंची झूठी राह की, अन्याय की अभिमान की, सेवा करण को दास की, परवाह नहीं हो जान की। छोटे न हो हम बुद्धि से, हो विश्वमय से ईश्वर, हो राममय और कृष्णमय, जगदेव में जगदीशमय। हरि इंद्रियों पर ताब कर, हम वीर हो अति वीर हो। चल रहे सर से सदा, निज धर्म रख खंभीर हो। अति शुद्ध हो आचार से, तन मन हमारा सर्वदा। आध्यात्म की शक्ति हमें पल भी नहीं कर दे जुदा। इस अमर आत्मा का हमें हर श्वास भर में गम रहे। गर मौत भी आ गई, सुख दुख हमसे कम रहे।
So, good afternoon, everyone. Today we have our keynote speaker, Saurabh Basirji from Udaipur. So, Saurabhji, as you are aware, this is our 100th webinar on the YouTube channel. We generally record the webinar on Microsoft Teams and then upload it on YouTube. And for your as well as for all participants' information, I may inform that in these webinars, mostly the speakers are the first-time speakers, or they may have spoken 1 or 2 times earlier and then repeat speakers. And all these speakers are students only. And in these 3 years, we have taken the webinars, or we have organized the webinars on multiple topics related to accounting standards, auditing standards, corporate law, GST, direct taxes, as well as many other non-technical topics too. So this is a brief about so far as this webinar is concerned. It's an initiative by Kalanian Company, and in fact, these are the recorded webinar. Apart from this, since last 5 decades, these type of webinars, or you can say classes, physical classes, have been organized by the firm in last several years, for last 5 decades. So that is an overall thing which I thought that I should first communicate to you as well as all the participants. And now I request today's speakers to please introduce our keynote speaker of this subject, that is compliances of the GST in the banking sector. So, Kashish Mangal will introduce our today's speaker, and then I request Saurabhji to please take the things forward.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Shall I start now?
Yes, you can just introduce.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Kashish Mangal, and I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Saurabh Basir. He is a qualified chartered accountant, and a company secretary with over 9 years of strong superlative experience in indirect tax advisory and litigation, including GST, custom, and erstwhile indirect tax laws. He has been engaged in transaction advisory, managing crucial tax litigations, and other services for marked clients across diversified sectors while working with multinational and domestic consulting firms. He is also a regular speaker at various panel discussions on indirect taxes and have registered his appearance on reputed media platform as part of expert panel of speaker. He is a GST and indirect tax partner at BGJC and Associates LLP based in New Delhi. Now, I would like to ask the Mr. Saurabh Basir to give an insight about the topic of compliance on GST in banking sector.
Thank you, Kashish. Thank you, Bhupen sir. It's a pleasure to be part of this 100th webinar. Very good afternoon to everyone. I would like to share a presentation if that is possible.
You can share.
So if you can allow me the rights to share if that is possible.
Yeah, just give us 1 minute.
Yeah.
So you can start now.
You can start sharing the screen.
I hope that is visible now.
No, sir, it's not visible.
It is.
It is visible.
It is visible, but we're all.
Is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think we can start. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Bhupen sir, again for inviting me, and congratulations for the 100th webinar. So we have a very interesting topic today for discussion related to GST compliances for banking sector. When we talk about banking sector per se, it is a very critical part of the economy, not just from the point of view of the compliances of banks or NBFCs. Banks play a very important role in overall GST implementation and underlying regulations. So yesterday, I was talking to Bhupen sir, and I understand there is some quiz which is there after each and every speaker reads out their note. So any thing on as to when was the first time when banking sector or NBFCs were brought under service tax net in India? Anyone?
Probably all of them may not have won the time.
True. So coming to the taxation of banking companies, while service tax was first implemented in India in 1994 for a very limited set of services, the services for banking companies was first brought under tax net in 2001. And at that point of time, the effective rate of tax was around 5%, which peaked around 15% inclusive of cesses till 2017. That is prior to rollout of GST. And in 2012, again, they introduced a negative list regime under service tax, where certain services like services provided by RBI and banks, including services like extending loans and deposits, was specifically kept out of the service tax net. That is, they were covered under the negative list. Now, with the implementation of GST in 2017, this whole concept of negative list was abolished. With the implementation of GST, when we talk about the taxation of banking sector, GST applied uniformly. I mean, all of the services, not just for banking companies, in all the sectors, they were deemed taxable unless they are covered within a exemption notification or they are out of the purview of GST law. That is, they are covered under Schedule 3 of the GST Act. Unless there is a specific exemption, all the services are liable to GST. So that is the basic difference when we talk about a service tax regime or a GST regime. There is a blanket taxability factor under GST for all the services. On the compliances part, I would say under service tax, we used to have a centralized registration across the country. So there used to be a central service tax registration, since the tax revenue was going directly to the central government. states were not impacted. Now with the rollout of GST,
Saurabh, we are also not able to see your video impact. If you can just
just I think maybe if you can, I'll send the presentation, and if you can run the presentation at your end.
No, presentation we are able to see, but not your video.
Just a minute.
Because that is important. Yeah, now we are able to see.
Is it fine?
Yes. Now you can.
Yes, just a minute.
Now you can share your presentation also, okay?
Yeah. So when we talk about compliances under service tax, there used to be a central registration, service tax registration, and the sole reason was that the tax revenue was going to central government. There was no role of states under the service tax regime. When we talk about GST, there is a share of state revenue as well. So as per some deeming provisions, in each state, since banks are working on almost every state, so in each and every state, they used to have a separate registration under GST. So when we talk about compliances compared to service tax regime, the compliances have shot up multiple times in the GST regime. This has in fact led to a overhaul of complete IT systems and process across the banking companies. And as already highlighted, the peak rate of service tax was around 15%, which has now gone to 18% under GST. So that's the base rate for services under GST. Right. Coming to services which are taxable or exempted. So in many cases, banks are providing transactional services like there are payment transfer services or ATM services, right? So all these services which are transactional in nature or are related to fund management, and many banks are also providing portfolio management services or stock broking services. All these services are liable to tax under GST, right? Now, what are exempt services? So certain set of services which are provided by RBI to the banks or authorized dealers, or services like handling of deposits or extending loans to the customers, and government schemes like PM Jan Dhan Yojana, which are routed through the bank channels. Those services, apart from other services, are exempted services under GST. So there is a bifurcation of services, transactional services or service which are directly related to the customers other than accepting deposits or lending services. Those are the services primarily liable to GST. So when we talk about lending services or handling of deposits, any interest paid or interest charged on the loans by the banks or NBFCs, those are not liable to GST. So those continue to be exempt services. Those were also covered under the negative list regime under service tax, and that is the status as on date also under GST as well. Now coming to the state-wise registration thing, as I said, under service tax, there used to be a single registration since this was totally monitored by the central government. Under GST, banks have to undertake a separate registration in each and every state where they are having a place of business. And when we say a place of business, that principally means having a branch office or maybe a office which is having a sufficient capacity of human resources or technical capacity. So in that particular case, the banks are required to have a registration. And when we talk about a registration, that is something where the bank is having registration under the same PAN. So at a entity level, there is no distinction, but for each state, there has to be a separate registration, and we normally term it as a distinct entity. So if we'll ask whether these are related entities or distinct entities, so there is a specific differentiation under GST law when an entity is having a same registration under same PAN, but in multiple states. Those entities are per se called as distinct entities and not related entities, right? When we talk about two different entities having different PAN, those are qualified as related persons specifically covered under Section 15 of the GST Act. So the list of related persons is specifically covered under Section 15. So there is a very specific distinction.
You are moving the slides. Presently, we are on overview of the impact of GST.
right now on registration requirements, I'm not sure if that is visible. Is it visible now?
Yes. Now it is
Yeah.
input tax.
Yeah. So when we talk about registration, as I said, there is a very thin line of difference between distinct entities and a related entity under GST law. So I'll just repeat again myself. When we have multiple registrations, maybe in a same state or different states under same PAN, which means the entity is same at PAN level, but having multiple registrations. So all those registrations are termed as distinct entities for that particular PAN. When there are different PAN, but the entities are related person, and related person, I mean those who are specifically identified as related entities under section 15 of the GST law, those are termed as related entities under GST. So even if a bank is having HO at Mumbai, and if it is having a operational branch in Rajasthan, right? So there'll be two different registrations, one in Rajasthan as well as in Maharashtra. In that case, the Maharashtra and Rajasthan branch will be termed as a distinct entity, not a related entity. Okay. So under GST, we need to have multiple registrations depending upon the operation of the bank, right? Now in Finance Act 2024, they again amended the provisions, and there is a concept of input service distributor, right? So we had a very debatable issue whether input service distributor is a mandatory thing. Now since Finance Act 2024, they have made the amendment in CGST Act, and then they have said that input service distributor is a mandatory provision, right? So in that case, there will be a separate registration for input service distributor. What is the concept of ISD? In case the subsequent speakers will cover it, well and good. If not, we'll take it up at the end of the session. So this is a separate registration apart from a general GST registration, which now banking companies have to obtain. The amendment has been made, but that has not been notified yet. So whenever it is notified, there will be a separate ISD registration, which has to be obtained by the banking companies or NBFCs. I think this is the most interesting provision related to input tax credit. So when we talk about the volume of banking company in terms of number of transactions, that is very high. And if we believe some reports, the digital banking transactions, that volume may touch 1.5 billion transactions per day in 2025. So you can just imagine the number of transactions. And in that case, the input tax credit related provisions, managing on the basis of normal provisions which are there in the Act, that is quite tedious task. So in that case, banks and NBFCs have been provided with an option, and we'll discuss the normal provision and then the optional provision which is there for the banks and NBFCs. So under normal provisions, input tax credit is allowed on taxable services provided by the banks or NBFCs, right? And a proportionate common ITC, that is, which is services which are used for supplying taxable services as well as exempted services. A proportionate ITC is allowed to the banks, right? There are specific formula and criteria defined in the CGST rules. Further, there is no ITC which is allowed, which is specifically related to exempted services. So this is as per the normal provision, which is applicable for each and every industry under GST law, right? Now, given the number of transactions which are there for a banking company or an NBFC, the government has inserted a specific provision under the ITC provisions, wherein they've said banks and NBFCs can avail 50% of the ITC which is available on inputs, capital goods, or input services in the particular month, and the balance 50% shall lapse. So that is a straight formula wherein they have said that whatever amount of input services, capital goods, or input goods you are consuming in a particular month, 50% of the eligible input tax credit. So it is very important, eligible input tax credit, that is allowed to the banks or NBFCs, right? So then there are certain activities which are notified under section 17, subsection 5. Those are specifically blocked credits. So those ITC line items which are specifically covered under section 17(5), those remain ineligible for the banks and NBFCs similar to other industries. So this is the specific option available to the banks and NBFCs when we say that 50% of the ITCs available on a straightforward basis on a monthly basis, and the rest shall lapse. So now banks and NBFCs can internally quantify as to which option is the best suited option in terms of availment of ITC. In normal criteria, we have seen that they are going away with the 50% criteria rather than maintaining books for taxable services and exempted services separately and getting that sorted on a proportionate basis. They are straightforward awaiting this 50% option, right? Now, if you once avail this option of 50%, you have to follow that option for the complete financial year. You cannot change that option during that financial year, right? Again, when we talk about 50% ITC, so this 50% ITC is not applicable in cases where there are inter or intra-entity transactions. So suppose let's take an example of again head office located in Maharashtra and a branch office in Rajasthan, right? So in case some IT equipments are sent by the head office in Maharashtra to the branch in Rajasthan. Now in case of IT equipments being goods, invoice has been issued by the Maharashtra location by the HO, and that invoice is carrying away with the goods which are received at the Rajasthan location. So effectively my input tax credit, which was there with the Maharashtra HO, that should have moved to Rajasthan. So in that case, do I get 50% option for availing that credit of those goods in Rajasthan, or 100% credit is available for such goods in Rajasthan? Because initially when the HO would have purchased the goods, right, they would have paid tax and they could have claimed 50% of ITC. Assuming that they have availed the 50% option, whenever the goods were purchased at HO, they would have get 50% of ITC on such goods. Now, when they are again moving those goods under a cover of invoice, GST would have been charged on that particular invoice, whether Rajasthan unit will get a 50% ITC or 100% ITC.
100%.
Correct. So there has been a specific proviso under this provision which says that 50% ITC option, that is not applicable in cases where the transaction is at a same PAN level, which means in case of a distinct entity transaction wherein there is a transaction of goods or services or even capital goods, right, between the same entity from one location to another location. In that case, that 50% ITC rule is not applicable. The recipient location will be eligible to avail 100% of ITC subject to the eligibility norms. So that is a specific benefit which they have allowed in intra-entity transactions. Now coming to the valuation rules again, in general terms, we have a very specific term called transaction value. So transaction value is something we call it as a price paid or payable for a particular supply of service. So in all the general criteria, the tax rate is 18% and the supply value is transaction value, that is price actually paid or payable by the recipient of services. Now, there are specific valuation rules provided specifically for forex related transaction and repurchased goods. So repurchased goods are something wherein bank seizes some defaulting parties' goods and auction them or sell them in an open market, right? So in those specific cases, specific valuation rules have been defined and they have to be followed by the banks. Coming to the related party transactions, again, related party transactions are not applied in case of, like, a normal transaction value cannot be applied in case of related party transactions. And when we talk about related party transactions, similar set of rules also apply on distinct entities. So even intra-entity transactions between two registrations of the same entity or between related parties wherein PAN is different, but the parties are related under section 15. So we have to resort to valuation provisions or rule 28 and subsequent rules under the CGST rules, right? So in those cases, there was a specific debate on the cross charge of services or transfer of employee cost from one state to another state. So in July 2023, CBIC came up with a specific circular on this issue, and they have specified the criteria or specified the transactions wherein related party transactions are deemed related party transactions in terms of transactions between distinct entities. They have specified the criteria for valuation and related compliances, including issuance of invoices. And a new term they have coined, which is internally generated services. So I would suggest everyone to please go through this circular, and they will have a good understanding of intra-entity services, taxability of such services, and the relevant tax applications, right? Last, although these are not specifically related to the banking compliances under GST, but these are something wherein we will call it a third-party related compliances, because
Sir, you are not audible.
You are mute, in fact. Hello.
hello.
Now you are audible. In fact, you are on mute for.
So we have completed valuation rules. I think everyone is on the same page. Hello.
Yes, sir.
You have started with the last slide, and then in fact you are mute.
Okay. Okay. So this last slide is not directly related to the compliances of banking companies or NBFCs, but many a times we have seen that a taxpayer is defaulted in his obligations, and then when it comes to recovery of tax or maybe attachment of bank account,
Sir, again you are muted.
hello.
Yes, sir. Now you are audible.
So is it visible?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So anything on the garnishee proceedings? Anyone having an idea of what exactly is garnishee proceedings? So let's take an example where a taxable person is defaulted in payment of tax, right? And now the department don't have any option to recover the tax, but the department is aware of that, you know, in a particular bank account of that taxable person, there lies certain amount which is owned by the taxable person. Now, in case of garnishee proceedings under section 79, the tax officer can ask the particular bank to freeze his bank account or put a debit freeze on his bank account, and ask that whatever amount which is there in the bank account of that particular taxable person, they have to freeze that amount and deposit that with the government, and that should be deemed as a recovery from that taxable person, right? So in that case, the bank is liable to deposit the tax with the jurisdictional officer who has issued the notice. And if there is any default on the part of bank in depositing that amount, and if the taxable person has withdrawn that amount after receiving the intimation from the jurisdictional officer, then in that case, bank can be held responsible for payment of such tax, which is due on part of the taxable person. So this is basically a recovery from a third party, which may include a bank, maybe a debtor who is there in the books of that taxable person. So we normally call it as a garnishee proceedings. So even banks are required to, you know, they are covered under this particular provision, and the tax authorities can ask them to pay such amounts in lieu of the tax liabilities of a third party who is having an account with the bank, right? Section 83 is again relevant for provisional attachment. This is slightly different, and this is not exactly a recovery of tax, but when it comes to the notice of the department that there is some issue, or there is an apprehension that, you know, the tax liability might not be discharged, or there can be a loss of government revenue. So in that case, the commissioner can ask the bank to attach the bank account to the taxable person. So this is not a pure recovery of tax, but it's just an apprehension that there can be a government revenue loss, and that is the reason those bank accounts are attached. There has to be a very reasonable cause for attaching that particular bank account. It is not possible that in a routine manner we can go and attach the bank accounts. So there has to be a conclusive evidence that there is a threat to the government revenue. In such cases, the commissioner can ask for a provisional attachment of bank accounts. Mainly it is during the time of investigation or raid cases, not in a general jurisdictional practice, to provide for a provisional attachment of bank account. And then we have specific rulings, and in fact the section itself provides that this attachment cannot be extended for more than 1 year from the date of order of provisional attachment. So this is about provisional attachment. So these are two different aspects. Garnishee proceedings start only once the recovery of tax has started, that is after the order of show cause notice has been passed and there is a specific liability assigned to the taxable person, and there is no mode of recovery directly from that taxable person, wherein provisional attachment is something which can initiate in case there is an apprehension of a revenue loss in terms of any tax loss which is there on part of the taxable person, right? Now, section 150 also deals with the information return. While the return form is not yet notified, we have seen that even under income tax, there is a liability on the banks to submit specific information about the taxpayers. So in case of section 150 also, there is a provision to submit an information return by the banks and NBFCs, and there are many other entities which are notified under section 150. Those have to submit the specified information to the GST authorities. So there is no return as of now which is notified, but in case of jurisdictional tax authorities, they are sending vague notices or direct inquiries to the banks or NBFCs. But if you'll ask, there is no specific return format which has been prescribed. And if there is any default on the part of bank, again, there is a penal liability which is there in case of a default under section 150, right? So these are specific obligations of the bank apart from their own compliance obligations. That's all from my side. Maybe we can take the questions, or maybe after we have all the speakers aligned, I think we can take up the questions separately, sir.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving us the insightful information on the various aspects of the GST on banking sector, like regarding the value of supply, the obligations which are held on the bank regarding the ITC.
So Saurabh, what we will do is that now our student speakers will take their respective presentations.
Sure.
And, where required, if you can support them, you are most
Sure.
welcome. Yeah.
No problem.
Share the presentation. Presentation नहीं आ रहा अभी.
Share screen.
क्या हुआ इसी में
Slide share.
शेयर दी स्क्रीन कर लूं
सर कर दिया।
स्क्रीन आ रही है तुम्हारी
Yes, sir. स्क्रीन शेयर करो। उधर किसी नहीं आई।
वो वाली खोली हुई थी ना, ये वहाँ पे शेयर करना है।
ये बंद कर। ये वाला बंद कर। क्रॉस कर। हुआ? दिक्कत हो रही। ये सीन
ये आ रहा है स्क्रीन आ रही है तो ऐसा प्रेजेंटेशन में मटा दो वैसे ही चलेगा
ठीक है। स्लाइड शो में है।
इसको ऐसे रहने दो। ठीक है
माइक ऑन है। माइक ऑन है।
So, hello everyone. Let's start our today's discussion. So, let's start our today's discussion on the topic compliance of GST in banking sector. It is further divided into three parts. My part of the topic of the discussion is time, value, and place of supply, income of the banking, and the exemptions they get under the GST sector. So before getting into the discussion, let's get a quick recap about the main aspect of the today's discussion, GST. So GST is a comprehensive tax which is levied on the manufacture, sale, and the consumption of the goods and services at a national level. So now going to the main discussion, what is the time of the supply we should consider for the calculation of the GST? Now, what is forward charge mechanism? So, forward charge mechanism may, when the services are given by the supplier to the recipient, he would collect the tax and become liable to pay the GST to the government. This is called the forward charge mechanism. So, in case of the forward charge mechanism, what is the time of supply? हम तीन कंडीशंस देखेंगे, जो भी इन तीनों में से सबसे अर्लियर होगा हम वो कंसिडर करेंगे. सो फर्स्ट कंडीशन, पहली बात आ जाती है, क्या सप्लायर इनवॉइस जो इशू कर रहा है वो विद इन अ टाइम कर रहा है या नहीं कर रहा है. सो व्हाट इज द टाइम टू इशू द इनवॉइस? The time to issue of invoice in case of the banking sector is within 45 days from the supply of the services. So if the supplier issues the invoice within 45 days from the supplying the services, then in that case we would consider the last date on which the supplier is required to issue the invoice and date of receipt of payment. इन दोनों में से सबसे अर्लियर जो होगा हम उसे लेंगे. सेकेंड थिंग, बट अगर सपोज करो कि सप्लायर इनवॉइस इशू नहीं कर पाया विद इन 45 डेज में, उस केस में हम डेट ऑफ प्रोविजन ऑफ सर्विस लेंगे और डेट ऑफ रिसिट ऑफ पेमेंट लेंगे. जो भी अर्लियर होगा हम दूसरी चीज उसे लेंगे. थर्ड थिंग आ जाता है कि डेट ऑन विच द रिसिपिएंट shows the receipt in his books of account. ये जो तीनों कंडीशंस बोली, इन तीनों में से सबसे अर्लियर जो होगा वही हमारा टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ऑफ सर्विस होगा in case of the forward charge mechanism. Am I clear now? Okay, moving forward, in case of the reverse charge mechanism, reverse charge में क्या होगा? सप्लायर ने सर्विस दे दी रिसिपिएंट को, बट यहाँ पे जो सप्लायर है वो रिसिपिएंट से टैक्स कलेक्ट नहीं कर रहा है. Now the receiver becomes liable to pay the GST to the government. So this is the difference between the forward and the reverse charge mechanism. Forward में supplier liable है to pay the GST, and in case of the reverse charge, receiver liable है to pay the GST to the government. अब बात आती है कि रिवर्स चार्ज के टाइम पे टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ऑफ सर्विस हम क्या लेंगे. सो इसमें आती है 3 डेट्स. इन तीनों में से जो भी अर्लियर होगा हम वो कंसिडर करेंगे टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई. फर्स्ट, डेट ऑफ पेमेंट एज एंटर्ड इन द बुक्स ऑफ द अकाउंट्स ऑफ रिसिपिएंट. रिसिपिएंट की बुक में, उसके बुक्स में कब पेमेंट एंटर हुआ है, कब डेबिट का एंट्री हुआ है, वो लेंगे डेट. जिस दिन उसका अकाउंट डेबिट हुआ है वो कंसिडर करेंगे डेट. एंड थर्ड थिंग इज इनवॉइस इशू होने के 61st डे को लेंगे. जो इन तीनों में से अर्लियर होगा वही हमारा टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ऑफ सर्विस होगा इन केस ऑफ द रिवर्स चार्ज मैकेनिज्म. Okay, moving forward, the second topic of our today's discussion, value of supply. Value of supply क्या होगा? वही अमाउंट जिसमें हम GST liable है पे करने के लिए. So it is the price which is actually paid or payable for the said supply of goods or services. Now the first thing, value of supply जो है वो equals होगा transaction value के. But इसमें 2 conditions हमें हैं जो कि हमें consider करनी होगी. First, supplier और जो recipient है वो related नहीं होने चाहिए. They should be unrelated party. And second is the price is the sole consideration. Now, कुछ conditions है कब वो related person होंगे under GST. So there are 7 conditions. First, such persons they are the officer or the director of one another's business. वो या तो officer है या director है एक दूसरे के business में, supplier and recipient कोई भी. Second, such person they are legally recognized partners in business. Third point, such person they are the employer or the employee of each other of the company. Fourth, any person who is directly या indirectly own कर रहा है, control कर रहा है या hold कर रहा है क्या 25% or more of the voting rights of the each of the company. Fifth point, कोई भी इनमें से कोई भी डायरेक्टली या इनडायरेक्टली कंट्रोल कर रहा है एक दूसरे को, या तो वो डायरेक्टर है या कोई भी एम्प्लॉयर एम्प्लॉई है या फिर किसी भी तरीके से रिलेशन है, वो नहीं होना चाहिए. 6, both of them they are directly or indirectly controlled by a third person. कोई थर्ड पर्सन ए और बी को कंट्रोल कर रहा है, वो कंडीशन नहीं होनी चाहिए. 7, together they directly or indirectly controls a third person or they are the members of the same family. same members नहीं होने चाहिए फैमिली के, या फिर कोई उन दोनों को ही कंट्रोल कर रहा है. सो ये 7 कंडीशंस है रिलेटेड पर्सन की अंडर जीएसटी, तो ये नहीं होना चाहिए. सो उस केस में हमारा वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई जो है वो इक्वल होगा ट्रांजैक्शन वैल्यू के. ये हमने देख लिया कि 2 कंडीशंस क्या देख रहे हैं. नाउ ट्रांजैक्शन वैल्यू में इंक्लूड क्या होगा और एक्सक्लूड क्या होगा. पहले हम बात करते हैं कि इंक्लूड क्या हो रहा है. तो इसमें इंक्लूड होगा कोई भी टैक्सेस अगर पे हो रहे हैं, टैक्स ड्यूटी सेस कुछ भी पे हो रहा है वो इंक्लूड होगा. कोई भी अमाउंट जो कि सप्लायर लायबल था पे करने के लिए, बट उसके बिहाफ पे अगर सपोज करो बायर ने इमरजेंसी के केस में पे भी कर दिया, बट स्टिल वो इंक्लूड होगा वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई में. थर्ड, कोई भी इंसिडेंटल एक्सपेंसेस वगैरह कोई भी पे हुए हैं वो. कोई इंटरेस्ट या लेट फीस चार्ज की गई है सप्लायर ने, कोई भी अगर सपोज करो कि जो रिसीवर था उसने कोई डिले कर दिया पेमेंट में, तो जो भी इंटरेस्ट वगैरह चार्ज हुआ है वो हम कंसिडर करेंगे. एंड द लास्ट है सब्सिडी. कोई भी सब्सिडी गवर्नमेंट प्रोवाइड कर रहा है या किसी और तरीके से उन्हें मिल रही है, तो वो चीजें हम ट्रांजैक्शन वैल्यू में कंसिडर करेंगे. नाउ बात आती है कि एक्सक्लूड क्या होगा. सो वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई में इंक्लूड नहीं होगा डिस्काउंट. कब नहीं होगा? या तो सप्लाई जब हो रही थी उससे पहले ही या उसी टाइम पे ही डिस्काउंट जो है वो दे दिया गया है और इनवॉइस में हमने प्रॉपर्ली उस चीज को मेंशन किया गया है. अगर वो इनवॉइस में मेंशन नहीं है या फिर सप्लाई होने के बाद दे रहे हैं तो उस चीज में वो डिस्काउंट जो है वो एक्सक्लूड नहीं होगा इन द कैलकुलेशन ऑफ वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई. बट देयर इज एन एक्सेप्शन. कब अपन उसे इंक्लूड कर सकते हैं? इवन आफ्टर द सप्लाई अगर डिस्काउंट दिया जा रहा है. कब? जब सप्लाई दी जा रही थी तब उस टाइम पे एक एग्रीमेंट था, उसमें कोई कंडीशन थी, उस केस में अगर हमने डिस्काउंट दिया है तो उस केस में वो एक्सक्लूड हो जाएगा. सो इस तरीके से अगर रिलेटेड पर्सन नहीं है और प्राइस इज द सोल कंसिडरेशन तो उस केस में वैल्यू सप्लाई इक्वल्स टू ट्रांजैक्शन वैल्यू. नाउ नेक्स्ट थिंग, वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई. अगर बैंकिंग सेक्टर,
जनरली बैंकिंग सेक्टर में आरपीटी ट्रांजैक्शंस क्या होते हैं?
आरबीटी,
रिलेटेड पार्टी ट्रांजैक्शंस.
ओके,
Saurabh, can you comment on this? Generally banking
Yeah.
sector में, yes.
So normally, as I said, in many cases there are multiple entities like banking companies are also providing stock broking services or insurance services, right? So I'll take an example like HDFC Bank is providing insurance services, but the product is actually of HDFC Life Insurance, right?
Okay.
In those cases, whatever commission or an income which is generated in hands of HDFC Bank, being an intermediary for selling those insurance policies, that is liable to be valued at a arm's length, or that will fall under related party definition for arriving at the valuation.
Yeah, so generally those group company transactions where suppose overall it is a bank, but then as of today there are multiple companies who are either into the insurance or some other business.
Correct. Stock broking, insurance, these are the peculiar transactions which are there. Yeah.
So moving to the next discussion, what would be the value of supply in case of the purchase and sale of foreign currency? Suppose करिए कि बैंक में purchase and sale हो रहा है foreign currency का, तो उस चीज का हम valuation कैसे करेंगे? इसके लिए दो options है. Option 1, उसमें दो चीजें देखेंगे, क्या जो करेंसी का जो एक्सचेंज हो रहा है वो क्या इंडियन रुपीज में हो रहा है या फिर फॉरेन करेंसी में ही अपन एक्सचेंज कर रहे हैं. अगर इंडियन करेंसी में एक्सचेंज हो रहा है, व्हेन एक्सचेंज फ्रॉम और टू INR, दैट इज द इंडियन रुपीज, उस चीज में हम देखेंगे कि आरबीआई की रेफरेंस रेट अवेलेबल है या नहीं है. कुछ आरबीआई अपनी रेफरेंस रेट्स बताता है करेंसी एक्सचेंज वगैरह के लिए, तो हम चीज देखेंगे क्या हमारे पास है या नहीं है. सपोज करिए हमारे पास है, तो हम क्या करेंगे, जब ये बाइंग और सेलिंग हो रहा है तो ये जिस रेट पे हो रहा है वो लेंगे माइनस आरबीआई का रेफरेंस रेट मल्टीप्लाई जितनी भी अपन करेंसी की यूनिट कर रहे हैं वो हम कंसीडर करेंगे. बट अगर सपोज करिए कि आरबीआई की रेफरेंस रेट हमारे पास नहीं है तो उस केस में 1% ऑफ द ग्रॉस अमाउंट होगा. हम इसको एक बार एक इलस्ट्रेशन के साथ देखते हैं. ओके, सो फर्स्ट इलस्ट्रेशन देखिए, द अमाउंट जो हमें कन्वर्ट करना है वो है 65,000. जो रेट हमें यूएसडी के अकॉर्डिंग दे रखी है वो ₹65 है. ओके, ना आरबीआई की रेफरेंस रेट जो है वो 63 है. तो यहाँ पे हमें रेफरेंस रेट जो है वो अवेलेबल है, तो अपन कौन से फर्स्ट वाले फॉर्मूला में जाएंगे. तो क्या हो गया, बाइंग रेट सेलिंग रेट माइनस आरबीआई रेफरेंस रेट मल्टीप्लाई टोटल यूनिट ऑफ करेंसी. तो टोटल यूनिट ऑफ करेंसी जो है वो सपोज करिए कि हमारे पास 1000 है. ओके, तो हम क्या करेंगे, 65 माइनस 63 मल्टीप्लाई जो हमने यूनिट ऑफ करेंसी ली है वो 1000 ली है, तो 1000 मल्टीप्लाई 65 माइनस 63 इक्वल्स टू 2000 जो है वो हमारा वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई हो जाएगा. वहीं अगर सपोज करिए कि आरबीआई की रेफरेंस रेट जो है वो अवेलेबल नहीं है, जैसे कि सेकंड केस में 65,000 का अमाउंट हमें कन्वर्ट करना है, रेट एज पर द यूएसडी जो है वो 65 रुपीज है, हमारे पास आरबीआई की रेफरेंस रेट नहीं है तो हम फर्स्ट फॉर्मूला नहीं लगा सकते. तो हम क्या करेंगे, 1% ऑफ द ग्रॉस अमाउंट. ग्रॉस अमाउंट इज बेसिकली जो अमाउंट अपन को कन्वर्ट करना है. सो यहाँ पे मैंने क्या किया है, 1% ऑफ 65,000 दैट इज ₹650. ओके, तो इस तरीके से जब करेंसी एक्सचेंज हो रही है इंडियन रुपीज में तो इस तरीके से वैल्यूएशन ऑफ सप्लाई होगा. एम आई क्लियर? ओके, नाउ नेक्स्ट, अगर सपोज करिए कि जो करेंसी एक्सचेंज हो रही है वो फॉरेन करेंसीज हैं, कोई भी इंडियन रुपीज में नहीं है, तो उस केस में जो वैल्यूएशन है इट वुड बी इक्वल्स टू 1% of lesser of the two amounts the person changing the money would have received by converting any of the two currencies into INR on that day at the reference rate provided by RBI. So it means कि जो valuation of supply जो है वो अपन 1% of the lesser of the two amounts करेंगे. जैसे कि example लिखते हैं उससे ज्यादा समझ आ जाएगा. So क्या दे रखा है example? If a person exchanged 100 euro by $120, यहाँ पे दो करेंसीज के एक्सचेंज हो रहा है पर दोनों ही फॉरेन करेंसीज हैं. सो हम सबसे पहले इन्हें इंडियन रुपीस में कन्वर्ट करेंगे एज पर द एक्सचेंज रेट. जैसे कि यहाँ पे एक्सचेंज रेट 77 INR है फॉर यूरो एंड डॉलर के लिए 65 है. तो वैल्यू ऑफ यूरो इन INR जो है वो 7700 हो जाएगा और वैल्यू ऑफ डॉलर जो है वो 7800 हो जाएगा. फॉर्मूला में मैंने क्या बोला 1% ऑफ द लेसर ऑफ द अमाउंट देखेंगे. तो इन दोनों को कन्वर्ट कर लेंगे पहले. जो लेसर है दैट इज 7700 एंड 7800. लेसर क्या है 7700 उसका 1% करेंगे विच इज 77 रुपीज. सो इस तरीके से हमारा वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई जो है वो मिल जाएगा अगर दोनों ही करेंसी जो है वो फॉरेन है. नाउ मूविंग टू ऑप्शन 2. ऑप्शन 2 में एक कंडीशन है. अगर मैंने उसको ऑप्ट कर लिया तो मुझे पूरे फाइनेंशियल ईयर उसे करना ही पड़ेगा. ये नहीं है कि मैं उसे मिड ऑफ द ईयर चेंज कर सकती हूँ. सो ऑप्शन 2 में तीन कैटेगरीज हैं कि अगर जो अमाउंट है जो करेंसी का जो अमाउंट है वो अप टू 1 लाख तक है तो उस केस में मैं 1% ऑफ द ग्रॉस अमाउंट ऑफ करेंसी एक्सचेंज और 250 विच एवर इज हायर करूंगी. ठीक है. वहीं अगर अमाउंट 1 लाख से ज्यादा है बट अप टू 10 लाख तक है तो उस केस में 1 लाख तक के लिए तो ऊपर कैलकुलेशन देख लिया विच इज 1% ऑफ द ग्रॉस अमाउंट ऑफ करेंसी. तो वही हमारा 1000 हो जाएगा प्लस 0.5% करेंगे जो 1 लाख से ज्यादा अमाउंट है उस पे. थर्ड कैटेगरी इज अगर सपोज करिए जो करेंसी एक्सचेंज हो रही है उसका अमाउंट 10 लाख से ज्यादा जा रहा है तो उस केस में 5500 लेंगे और प्लस करेंगे इसमें हम 0.110% ऑफ द ग्रॉस अमाउंट ऑफ करेंसी एक्सचेंज अबव 10 लाख. 10 लाख से ज्यादा जो करेंसी एक्सचेंज हुई है वो अमाउंट लेंगे उस पे अपन 0.10% अप्लाई करेंगे प्लस 5500 करेंगे. बट एक कंडीशन है कि इन दोनों का सम करके ये ज्यादा किससे नहीं जा सकता 60,000 से ज्यादा नहीं जा सकता. सपोज करिए कैलकुलेशन करके मेरा 70,000 आ रहा है पर कंडीशन है 60,000 तक ही ये रहेगा तो उस केस में वैल्यू सप्लाई हमारा 60,000 हो जाएगा. जैसे कि अगर हम एग्जांपल देखें तो यहाँ पे फर्स्ट है हमारा 6500. ओके. नाउ ये फर्स्ट कैटेगरी में मीट कर रहा है दैट इज अप टू 1 लाख. अप टू 1 लाख तक में क्या बोला मैंने कि अपन 1% ऑफ द ग्रॉस अमाउंट करेंगे या फिर 250 विच एवर इज लोअर. तो 1% ऑफ 650 करेंगे तो विच इज 650 और 250 विच एवर इज लोअर इज 250 जो है वो हमारा अमाउंट आ जाएगा. नाउ नेक्स्ट केस की बात करूं 65,000 है. ये भी फर्स्ट कैटेगरी में फॉल कर रहा है. इसका अगर मैं 1% करूंगी इट इज 650 और 250 विच एवर इज लोअर विच एवर इज हायर तो उस केस में 650 हो जाएगा. नाउ द नेक्स्ट इज 6,50,000. ये हमारा सेकेंड कैटेगरी में फॉल कर रहा है विच इज लाइक 1 लाख से ज्यादा है बट अप टू 10 लाख तक है. तो उस केस में क्या करेंगे हम 1000 प्लस एक्सेस ऑफ 1 लाख कितना है. यहाँ पे एक्सेस ऑफ 1 लाख देखें तो 5,50,000 है उस पे ही हम 0.5% लगाएंगे तो यहाँ पे हमारा सोल्यूशन आ जाएगा 3750. नाउ नेक्स्ट केस की बात करें 65 लाख की. ये थर्ड कैटेगरी में फॉल कर रहा है विच इज एक्सीडिंग 10 लाख. तो उस केस में तो हमारा ये 5500 इतना प्लस करेंगे और प्लस कर देंगे 10 लाख से जो ज्यादा जा रहा है विच इज 0.10% ऑफ 55 लाख. तो इसका हम जब सब करेंगे तो वो हमारा 10,500 आ जाएगा. तो इस तरीके से दो हमारे वैल्यूएशन के लिए जब हमें परचेज और सेल कर रहे हैं फॉरेन करेंसी तो दो ऑप्शन है बैंक के पास. वो ऑप्शन 1 में भी जा सकता है ऑप्शन 2 में भी जा सकता है. उसका चॉइस रहेगा कि वो किस तरीके से वैल्यू सप्लाई करेगा. बट ऑप्शन 2 में जा रहा है तो वो रिमेनिंग पार्ट ऑफ द फाइनेंशियल ईयर में चेंज नहीं कर सकता. नाउ द नेक्स्ट इज सर्विसेज का वैल्यूएशन इन केस ऑफ द डिस्टिंक्ट एंड रिलेटेड पर्सन. अगर डिस्टिंक्ट और रिलेटेड पर्सन के बीच में वैल्यूएशन हो रहा है तो उस केस में सर्विसेज का वैल्यू कैसे होगा. इट वुड बी एज पर रूल 28 सब क्लॉज 1. तो उसमें ये होता है कि सबसे पहले हम ओपन मार्केट वैल्यू देखेंगे. बट अगर सपोज करिए कि जो सामने वाला रिसीवर जो इफ इट इज एंटाइटल्ड टू द फुल आईटीसी तो उस केस में हम इनवॉइस वैल्यू को ही ओपन मार्केट वैल्यू ले लेंगे। बट अगर सपोज करिए ओपन मार्केट वैल्यू नहीं है तो हम उसी क्वालिटी या फिर उसी से सिमिलर की जो वैल्यू रही होगी हम उसको कंसिडर करेंगे। थर्ड, अपन रूल 30 के अकॉर्डिंग भी वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई कैलकुलेट कर सकते हैं विच इज द कॉस्ट मेथड, या फिर हम रूल 31 के अकॉर्डिंग भी कर सकते हैं विच इज रेसिड्यूरी मेथड। या फिर एक और ऑप्शन है इन सब के अलावा भी कि वो 90% ऑफ द रीसेल प्राइस ऑफ द रिसिपिएंट जितने में रीसेल करता हूँ उसका 90% जो है वो हम कंसिडर करेंगे। ना रूल 30 और रूल 31 में क्या कहा गया है? रूल 30 में कहा गया है कि बेसिकली वैल्यू सप्लाई का ले लेंगे, जो भी उसका कॉस्ट रहेगा उसमें हम 10% मार्कअप जो है वो ऐड कर देंगे, वही हमारा वैल्यू सप्लाई हो जाएगा। ये हम कब लेंगे? जब ना तो हमारे पास ओपन मार्केट वैल्यू है ना ही उससे सिमिलर कोई ट्रांजैक्शन मिल रहा है, तो उस केस में हम रूल 30 में जाएंगे। रूल 31 में हो जाएगा it will be determined by using the reasonable means consistent with the principle या फिर जो provision है GST के लॉ उस अकॉर्डिंग हम रूल 31 करेंगे। Now next is valuation of the goods which is repossessed from a defaulting borrower। जैसे कि जो borrowers होते हैं वो default कर देते हैं लोन के repayments में, तो उनके जो goods का valuation होता है वो हम कैसे करेंगे? तो वो हम करेंगे जो भी परचेस प्राइस रही थी उस गुड्स की उसको हम रिड्यूस कर देंगे 5% की रेट से एज पर द क्वार्टर, जो भी डेट ऑफ परचेस और डेट ऑफ डिस्पोजल के बीच में जितने क्वार्टर्स रहे होंगे उस अकॉर्डिंग हम उसे 5% की रेट से रिड्यूस करके हमें वैल्यू ऑफ सप्लाई जो है वो मिल जाएगा। सो मूविंग टू द नेक्स्ट डिस्कशन, द प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई। अब हम कंसिडर करेंगे प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई। प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई क्यों चाहिए हमें? क्योंकि वो उसी अकॉर्डिंग उसी स्टेट में जिस जो प्लेस लेंगे उस अकॉर्डिंग उस स्टेट के अंदर जीएसटी जो है वो लगेगा उसका, ठीक है। तो प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई कैसे होती है बैंकिंग के केस में? सो द प्लेस ऑफ द सप्लाई ऑफ द बैंकिंग सर्विस इज द लोकेशन ऑफ द रिसिपिएंट इन द रिकॉर्ड्स ऑफ द सप्लायर। सप्लायर के रिकॉर्ड्स में जो भी प्लेस दे रखी है रिसीवर की वो हम कंसिडर कर लेंगे। बट अगर सपोज करिए कि सप्लायर के बुक में उसके पास रिसीवर की एड्रेस नहीं है, तो उस केस में हम then the place of the supply is the location of the supply of services। जो सप्लायर है सर्विसेज का उसका लोकेशन जो है वही हम प्लेस ऑफ सप्लाई जो है वो कंसिडर कर लेंगे। ओके, नाउ मूविंग टू द नेक्स्ट डिस्कशन, इनकम फ्रॉम वेरियस सोर्सेज। नाउ हम इसमें ये देखेंगे कि बैंक किस किस तरीके से इनकम जनरेट करता है या रेवेन्यू से कहाँ से मिलता है। सो फर्स्ट आता है इंटरेस्ट इनकम। इंटरेस्ट से मिलता है, जैसे कि जो बैंक जो होता है उसका मेन काम है डेट वगैरह देना, एडवांसेस देता है, लोन वगैरह, डिपॉजिट्स एंड एक्सेट्रा। ओके, तो उसके अगेंस्ट में जो उसे इंटरेस्ट मिलता है एक वो इनकम होती है इंटरेस्ट इनकम। पर वो जो है वो हमारी एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगी अंडर द जीएसटी। बट देयर इज एन एक्सेप्शन, अगर इंटरेस्ट उसे मिल रहा है क्रेडिट कार्ड के एक्सचेंज में, उसने क्रेडिट कार्ड दिया उसके बदले में जो रिसिपिएंट है इंटरेस्ट वगैरह पे कर रहा है, वो उस पे हमें जीएसटी पे करना पड़ेगा उस इंटरेस्ट इनकम पे बैंक को।
कस्टमर जो है
हाँ,
so they are paying late and the bank is charging interest, then that interest is taxable.
नाउ कमीशन इनकम। कमीशन इनकम उस केस में क्या होगा, जैसे कि सपोज करिए कि बैंक और भी सर्विसेज वगैरह प्रोवाइड करता है कि हाँ आप मेरे यहाँ से ये कर सकते हैं, कुछ सिक्योरिटीज का एक्सचेंज वगैरह, तो उस केस में बैंक कुछ कमीशन चार्ज करता है। जैसे कि सपोज करिए कि XYZ लिमिटेड को इन्वेस्ट करना है किसी सिक्योरिटीज में, बट देयर इज दिस थिंग कि वो सिर्फ और सिर्फ आईसीआई से रूट होती है, उसके अगेंस्ट में आईसीआई जो है कुछ कमीशन चार्ज करता है, तो वो जो कमीशन चार्ज कर रहा है वो हमारा लायबल टू जीएसटी होगा। Now next is agency charges. So बैंक कभी कभी एज एन एजेंट भी वर्क करता है। एजेंट किसका हो सकता है? So he can be appointed as an agent only either by the RBI, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, या फिर किसी कॉर्पोरेट ने उसे एज एन एजेंट जो है वो हायर कर सकती है किसी बैंक को। एज एन एजेंट वो काम क्या करेगा? किसी बिजनेस फैसिलिटेटर या कलेक्शन सेंटर किसी का काम कर रहा है, तो उसके अगेंस्ट में वो एजेंसी चार्जेस लेता है। They are also liable to GST. Now next is portfolio management services. Portfolio that is the investment का management का services जो बैंक provide करता है उसके against में भी वो amount लेता है, that is the portfolio management service charges. Next is the credit debit card charges. बैंक credit debit card वगैरह issue करता है तो उसके against में भी वो charges लेता है, ये भी एक revenue का source है। नेक्स्ट इज द अकाउंट मेंटेनेंस एंड लॉकर चार्जेस। मैंने आज कोई अकाउंट खुलवाया तो उसके लिए कुछ मेंटेनेंस चार्जेस बैंक लेता है। लॉकर अपन खुलवाते हैं तो उसके अगेंस्ट में भी चार्जेस लेता है बैंक, तो वो भी हमारा लायबल है टू जीएसटी। बट देयर इज एन एक्सेप्शन, अगर जो लॉकर खोल रहा है वो अंडर प्रधानमंत्री जनधन योजना के अंदर है, तो उस केस में जो भी अकाउंट होल्डर्स होंगे उनके मेंटेनेंस चार्जेस या उनके लॉकर चार्जेस जो है वो जीएसटी से एग्जेम्प्ट रहेंगे। नाउ नेक्स्ट इज डिजिटल पेमेंट फैसिलिटीज। बैंक जो है अपने कस्टमर्स को काफी और भी फैसिलिटीज देता है, जैसे कि कुछ कस्टमर्स होते हैं या कंपनीज जो है ज्यादा प्रेफर करती हैं कि वो जो भी पेमेंट रिसीव करेंगी वो क्रेडिट कार्ड या डेबिट कार्ड इन सब के थ्रू करेंगे। जैसे पेंटालून्स की हम बात करें तो वो जो भी पेमेंट ले रही है अपने कस्टमर से थ्रू डेबिट कार्ड, क्रेडिट कार्ड वगैरह, तो उसमें अगर जो सिंगल ट्रांजैक्शन का अमाउंट है वो अगर अप टू 2000 है तो उस केस में जो भी चार्जेस बैंक ले रहा है वो एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा जीएसटी से। सपोज करो कि बैंक जो है डिजिटल पेमेंट फैसिलिटीज के बदले में 2% चार्ज लेता है और 2000 तक का ट्रांजैक्शन हुआ है, तो 2000 का 2% जो कि 40 रुपीज है वो हमारा एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा जीएसटी से। वहीं अगर ये 3000 का ट्रांजैक्शन होता है उस पे 2% दैट इज द 60 रुपीज, वो हमारा जीएसटी के लिए लायबल रहेगा। Now next is sale and purchase of foreign currency। बैंक जो है वो सेल और परचेज भी करता है फॉरेन करेंसी का, तो जो भी ट्रांजैक्शन अमाउंट रहता है वो भी हमारा लायबल टू जीएसटी रहेगा। इसका एक एग्जेम्पशन रहेगा कि अगर सपोज करिए कि जो सेल और परचेज हो रहा है फॉरेन करेंसी का वो अगर बैंक और बैंक के बीच में हो रहा है या बैंक या किसी ऑथराइज डीलर या ऑथराइज डीलर और ऑथराइज डीलर के बीच में हो रहा है, तो उस केस में जीएसटी के अंदर वो लायबल नहीं रहेगा। Now there are various other sources of the income like assignment or the sale of the debts वगैरह कंपनी देती बैंक देते हैं तो वो हमारा चार्जेबल टू जीएसटी नहीं होगा। डेट जो है वो एज एन एक्शनेबल क्लेम है, तो अगर वो अपना राइट टू रिकवर द डेट किसी को ट्रांसफर करता है तो उस केस में वो लायबल टू जीएसटी होगा, अदरवाइज वो एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा हमारा जीएसटी से।
क्या होता है असाइनमेंट और सेल ऑफ डेट्स? किसी और को सेल कर देना अपने गुड्स, अपने जो डेट्स हैं, तो उसके जितने भी रिकवरी के राइट्स हैं और जो भी है, तो ये बैंकिंग और एनबीएफसी के बीच में आपस में काफी इस तरीके के ट्रांजेक्शन।
Okay, now next is the future contract of the currencies। बैंक जो है काफी करेंसी से रिलेटेड फ्यूचर कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स करती है, so they are not chargeable under the GST। नेक्स्ट इज जो इनकम फ्रॉम कमर्शियल पेपर या फिर जो सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ डिपॉजिट देती है अपने कस्टमर्स वगैरह को, so वो इनकम एक होती है, वो भी हमारी एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगी। नेक्स्ट इज बैंक जो है वो लेटर ऑफ क्रेडिट या प्रोमिसरी नोट वगैरह इशू करते हैं, वो भी एग्जेम्प्ट रहेंगे क्योंकि ना तो वो गुड्स है ना सर्विसेज है। जीएसटी लगता है गुड्स या सर्विसेज पे, ये मनी हो गया, प्रोमिसरी नोट दे वर्क एज अ मनी, सो वो हमारे एग्जेम्प्ट रहेंगे। लोन्स के प्रोसेसिंग फीस बैंक लेता है तो उस केस में वो भी टैक्सेबल रहेगा। नाउ देयर आर फॉरवर्ड कॉन्ट्रैक्ट भी होते हैं करेंसीज में, दे आर लायबल अंडर द जीएसटी। नाउ बैंक स्टेटमेंट चार्जेस या फिर स्टैंडिंग इंस्ट्रक्शन चार्जेस, स्टॉप पेमेंट चार्जेस जो है इनको इशुएंस में बैंक कुछ लेता है, दैट इज द रेवेन्यू इट टेक्स, सो वो भी हमारा टैक्सेबल रहेगा। एक्सेप्ट फॉर हूँ, प्रधानमंत्री जनधन योजना के अंदर जितने भी बैंक होल्डर्स हैं उनके लिए जो बैंक स्टेटमेंट चार्जेस वगैरह रहेंगे उस पे जीएसटी नहीं लगेगा। नाउ अगर सपोज करिए कि कोई चेक था जो मेरा डिसऑनर हो गया, तो उसके अगेंस्ट में अगर बैंक सपोज करिए कि फाइन या पेनल्टी ले रहा है तो वो भी हमारा टैक्सेबल नहीं होगा। नाउ मूविंग टू द लास्ट टॉपिक, जीएसटी एग्जेम्पशन इन बैंकिंग इंडस्ट्री, वो क्या रहेंगी? सो द फर्स्ट इज बैंक जो है वो डिपॉजिट्स, लोन्स, एडवांसेस वगैरह देता है, इसके अगेंस्ट में वो कस्टमर से इंटरेस्ट या फिर ये सब चार्ज करता है, तो वो हमारा जीएसटी से एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा। एक्सेप्ट इंटरेस्ट अगर क्रेडिट कार्ड सर्विसेज पे है तो वो हमारा लायबल टू जीएसटी रहेगा। सेकेंड थिंग, अगर सेल या परचेज हो रहा है फॉरेन करेंसी का बैंक और बैंक के बीच में, ऑथराइज डीलर और बैंक के बीच में, या फिर ऑथराइज डीलर और ऑथराइज डीलर के बीच में अगर परचेज सेल हो रहा है तो वो हमारा एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा जीएसटी में। जो भी बैंक सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड करता है उन बैंक होल्डर्स को जिन्होंने अपना अकाउंट खोला है अंडर द प्रधानमंत्री जन धन योजना, वो भी हमारा जीएसटी से एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा। फोर्थ पॉइंट, जैसे सपोज करिए कि कहीं पे हम शॉप करने गए पेंटालून्स में, तो अगर कुछ शॉप किया, देन वी स्वाइप द क्रेडिट कार्ड, ओके। सो अगर सिंगल ट्रांजैक्शन का अमाउंट हमारा अप टू 2000 है, फॉर दैट सेटलमेंट बैंक जो है वो कुछ चार्जेस भी लेता है। तो अगर वो अप टू 2000 है तो वो एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा जीएसटी से, बट अगर वो 2000 से ऊपर चला जाता है तो उस पे वो जो चार्जेस लेगा वो हमारा जीएसटी के लिए लायबल रहेगा। नाउ नेक्स्ट, सर्विसेज कुछ प्रोवाइड करता है, जैसे कि सपोज करिए कि बिजनेस फैसिलिटेटर या बिजनेस करेस्पॉन्डेंट किसी बैंकिंग कंपनी को फैसिलिटी देता है, बट देयर इज अ कंडीशन कि वो रूरल एरिया में होनी चाहिए, अर्बन में नहीं। अगर कोई बिजनेस फैसिलिटेटर या बिजनेस करेस्पॉन्डेंट बैंकिंग कंपनी को सर्विसेज दे रहा है जो कि रूरल एरिया में है, तो वो एग्जेम्प्ट रहेंगी। कोई पर्सन जैसे कि वो उसका एजेंट एज एन एजेंट बिजनेस फैसिलिटेटर को दे रहा है और वो रूरल कंपनी में बैंकिंग को दे रहा है, तो वो भी हमारा एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा। कोई बिजनेस फैसिलिटेटर या बिजनेस करेस्पॉन्डेंट किसी इंश्योरेंस कंपनी को दे रहा है रूरल एरिया में, तो वो भी हमारा एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा। नेक्स्ट पॉइंट, सर्विसेज जो कि एशियन डेवलपमेंट बैंक या फिर इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल कॉर्पोरेशन जो सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड करती हैं, वो भी हमारा जीएसटी से एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगा। नाउ द लास्ट इज, जैसे कि सपोज करिए कि जो सेज एरियाज होते हैं हमारे स्पेशल इकोनॉमिक जोन एरियाज, अगर उनके अंदर इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल सर्विस सेंटर्स होते हैं और वो सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं उन कस्टमर्स को जो कि आउटसाइड द इंडिया है, तो वो जो सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं उनकी जो इनकम वगैरह है वो हमारी एग्जेम्प्ट रहेगी जीएसटी से। पर ये जो इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल सर्विस सेंटर वो कौन सकते हैं? ये वही हो सकते हैं जो कि गवर्नमेंट ने रिकॉग्नाइज करे हैं, फर्स्ट थिंग। सेकेंड थिंग, इनको रिकॉग्नाइज किया गया एज अ रेसिडेंट आउटसाइड द इंडिया एज पर फेमा एक्ट, या फिर वो रजिस्टर्ड हो अंडर द इंश्योरेंस रेगुलेटरी एंड डेवलपमेंट अथॉरिटी ऑफ इंडिया, एंड द लास्ट इज दे आर परमिटेड बाय द सेबी। सो उस केस में अगर वो सेज एरिया में, जैसे कि गुजरात में ओपन है हमारा आईएफएससी सेंटर, तो वो अगर सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं टू द कस्टमर हु इज आउटसाइड द इंडिया, सो इस केस में वो जो सर्विसेज हैं वो हमारे जीएसटी से एग्जेम्प्ट रहेंगे। So thank you so much for everyone for giving the time. Um, now it's the time for the quiz.
So I have already shared the links of the quiz, and till our quiz master is prepared, Saurabh, you want to support anything on the subject?
So, sir, I think there is one specific coverage whether check dishonor charges, which is again a very common transaction, whether that is a service liable to GST or not. So any specific reason, anyone, I mean, why that is not a supply of service?
Check dishonor charges is not a supplier of service.
Yeah,
I'm
That
not
is
saying it is not-
that's,
I'm not saying it is not a supply of service, but if it is not, why?
it is more kind of a punishment, in fact. But then is it it is like damages or?
So there is a term under, and that was under service tax as well, tolerating an act, right?
Yeah.
So tolerating an act of someone is again a supply of service. Now, whether dishonor of check is a act of tolerating an act or it is a penalty for deterring someone to, ensure that the amount is paid. So in case of dishonor of checks, again, there was a circular in August 2022, which said that this is not a act of tolerating an act by a person whose check is dishonored, right? So this is a penal act, and that is used to deter the particular thing, right? The bank is not promoting dishonor of checks, so we can't say that this is a act of tolerating something. That is the reason that circular clarified that dishonor of check is not liable to GST. But again, that is only through a circular. Might be a case where tax authorities can take some opposite stance.
Correct. Yeah. So we already have 88 participants with us in this quiz. I request quiz master to please start the quiz. All those who have not yet came to the quiz can also now join. So which section governs the provisions regarding determining time of supply of services?
Thank you.
20-second time is given. You could give the answer. And then another question is commission income liable to GST? Followed by Sakshi Jain. Which of the income is taxable under GST in banks? Interest on that, interest on credit card, both of the above, none of these. हैं? मुझे तो दोनों ही गलत है, चारों गलत है, तो तुमने explain किया था.
Interest on credit card.
That is not taxable.
That is chargeable.
That is chargeable.
That is chargeable.
What is the tax rate applicable on the services provided by the bank?
It is.
और 1994 में क्या रेट था? 1994 when service tax was started, it was 5%. So Urmi is leading the board now. So we have this first page is over. Now another speaker will come.
Last question. Is the last question.
Okay, one more question is there. One more page is there. Time of supply of services under RCM would be earlier of the following. All of the above cases also.
मेरा प्रश्न था क्या? एक सेकंड का डिस्कशन का स्टार्ट. हाँ.
No, ये कुछ
गड़बड़ कर दी.
तुमने 3 अलग-अलग पेज नहीं किए थे क्या?
3 अलग-अलग पेज दिए थे ना. दिव्यांशु बनाया क्या?
So anyways, as of now, Urmi is leading, followed by Gar and Sarthak. So let me see whether they are able to take the same position in other quiz also. And so many of you have actually till now answered 100% correct answer. Now we can start with the another speaker. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Continuing further to Kashish of the topic compliance of GST under banking sector, I would like to break down my topics, which is expenses incurred and ITC availed by the banking sector. As you are seeing expenses incurred, the bank also incurred daily life expenses, which are upon documentation, audit fees, and mostly expenses are incurred under RCM. So bank expense means all the reasonable and documented cost or expenses included reasonable attorney fees and expenses, whether generated in-house or outside counsel, incurred in connection with the preparation, negotiation, administration, and enforcement of the loan documents. Reasonable collateral audit fees as well. Generally, obligation to discharge GST lies on the supplier of supply, but there exist a certain cases on which RCM is applicable. Various expenses incurred by the bank are eligible to tax under RCM. What is RCM? We all know according to section number 9.1 and 9.2 are covered under forward charge mechanism, and 9.3 and 9.4 are covered under reverse charge mechanism, where a registered recipient unregistered supplier provides services to the registered recipient, and the registered recipient provide the tax to the government. Under RCM, the duty to discharge tax is cast on the recipient of supply. RCM under GST depends on the nature of supply and on the nature of supplier. All taxpayer required to pay tax under RCM must mandatorily obtain registration, and the threshold exemption is not applicable to them. Payment of tax under RCM cannot be made with the utilization of ITC and must be made in cash. Unlike service tax, where both full and partial reverse charge exist, in GST only full reverse charge subsists. You can have a look on the flow of a GST under RCM method. Have a look on it. The list of RCM suppliers are as under. Description of supplier services. Service supplied by a recovery agent to a banking company or financial institution or NBFC. Supplier of a good would be a recovery agent, and the recipient of supply would be a banking company or financial institution or NBFC located in a taxable territory. तो इसमें अपना टैक्स कौन देगा? A banking company or financial institution or NBFC, क्योंकि RCM में recipient देता है टैक्स. Second, supply of services by GTA, Goods Transport Agency, where supplier of the services would be a GTA and the recipient would be a factory registered under government by Factories Act 1948 or Registration Act 1860 or any other law for the time being in force in any part of India, or any cooperative society established by or under any law. Any person registered under CGST Act, SGST Act or IGST Act or UTGST Act, or any body corporate established by or under any law, including association of person or partnership firm. Partnership firm maybe it can be registered or not. Any CTP or located in taxable territory. Services provided by an advocate, including senior advocate, by a representational service before a court tribunal or an authority by way of legal service to a business entity. Supplier would be any individual advocate, including a senior advocate or a firm of advocate. Any business entity located in a heritable territory would be a recipient of supply. Excuse me. There is a note regarding the Goods Transport Agency. However, RCM shall not apply to services provided by GTA by way of transport of goods in a good carriage by road to a department established of a CG, SG or UT or a local authority or government agency which has been taken registration under the CGST Act only for the purpose of deducting tax and under section number 51 and not for making a taxable supply of goods and services. Further, nothing contained in this entry shall apply where the supplier has already taken a registration under the CGST Act 2017 and exercised the option to pay the tax on the services of GTA in relation to transport of goods supplied by him under forward charge, and the supplier has issued a tax invoice to recipient charging GST, CGST at the applicable rates and has made the prescribed declaration on such invoice issued by him. We have already discussed the services provided by a recovery agent. यहाँ पे बैंक जो होता है वो बहुत लोगों को लोन दे देता है, ठीक है। तो अब इस लोन को रिकवर करने के लिए बैंक क्या करता है, एक रिकवरी एजेंट हायर करते हैं। तो जो बैंक रिकवरी एजेंट हायर कर रहा है उसको वो फीस भी देगा और कमीशन भी लेगा वो। तो वो जो है अमाउंट वो आरसीएम बेसिस के हिसाब से टैक्सेबल हो जाएगा। तो जनरली loans are the areas where banks earn major portion of their income. It is the most organized form of extending credit to the customer, and interest income is earned in respect of such credit extended. Majority of banks spend great time and effort in recovering credit so granted. Further, many banks sell their loans to third party or hire third party agents to initiate recovery on their behalf. Loans sold to the factoring agent are not liable for payment of GST. Please examine that these transactions would be exempt supply depending on whether these are or with or without recourse. Third party are hired to initiate recovery on the behalf of the bank, which is purely a service transaction and liable to payment of GST. RCM is applicable on such transactions, and therefore the banks who hire such third-party agents are liable for payment of GST on fees so paid to the recovery agent or third-party agent. Bank also provide infrastructure, phone facilities, and other benefits to these third-party agents in order to perform their services. Even such value is required to be taken in consideration while determining the value of supply for the purpose of payment of GST. As an auditor, one should check the pay agreement between the bank and the recovery agent. Under GST regime, the bank should raise a self-invoice and thereafter appropriate GST at the rate 18% should be part of the same. The income so earned should be disclosed in the relevant chapter heading as classified under the GST regime. Services provided by advocate. We all know that advocate provides services to the banking services. So RCM is applicable on services provided by an individual advocate, including a senior advocate or firm of advocate, by way of legal services directly or indirectly. Where legal service means any service provided in relation to advice, consultancy, or assistance in branch of law in any manner and includes representational services before any court, tribunal, or authority. Usually, legal services are availed by bank on account of their customer. Here, auditors need to ensure that the bank do not withhold themselves from the payment of RCM on legal fee paid on the premise that these services are availed on account of their customers, especially when the legal fee is debited to the customer's account. It is more appropriate that the bank discharge RCM as a fee from advocate will be issued to the bank. Very often, it is observed that the expenses are incurred but debited to the customer account. RCM liability thereon is somehow omitted. Customer being unaware of various components of cost and they are embedded in the amount debited to the account. RC liability cannot possibly discharged by them. Hence, bank may be advised to suitably ensure RCM is complied with. Next, supply of services by member overseeing committee to RBI. Suppliers of service would be members of overseeing committee constituted by RBI, and the recipient would be RBI. Next, services supplied by individual direct selling agent other than body corporate partnership or limited liability partnership to bank or NBFC. Suppliers would be individual direct selling agent other than body corporate partnership or limited liability partnership. Recipient would be a banking company or NBFC company located in the taxable territory. So the tax would be paid by NBFC or banking company on the direct selling agent services. Next, services provided by business facilitator to bank or a business suppliers would be business facilitator, and recipient of supplier would be banking company located in the taxable territory. Services provided by an agent of business correspondent to a business correspondent. Suppliers would be agent of business correspondent, and the recipient would be a business correspondent located in the taxable territory. Services of the lending of securities under Securities Lending Scheme 1997 of SEBI as amended, suppliers would be a lender and the recipient would be a borrower. Next, supplier services is supplied by an insurance agent to a person carrying on insurance business. Suppliers and insurance supplier of service would be an insurance agent, and the recipient would be any supplier carrying on insurance business located in taxable territory. Services provided by an insurance agent. The business, as we all know, that the bank also are engaged in insurance business. So the fees and the reimbursement provided by the bank to insurance agent are liable to tax under RCA method. If the banks are also engaged in the business of insurance, then the services provided by such insurance agent who sell insurance product of the bank is liable for payment of GST. Further, on which tax is payable is the commission paid to the insurance agent. Such commission also include reimbursement by any mode. The insurance division of the bank receiving the services from the insurance agent are liable payment of GST under RCM. As an auditor, one should check the agreements between the bank and the insurance agent. Under GST regime, the bank should raise a self-invoice and thereafter appropriate GST at the rate of 18% should be paid on the same. The income so earned should be disclosed in the relevant chapter heading and classified under GST regime. There are other services, other expenses which incurred by the bank through importing, which are bond floating expenditure, underwriting charges, and infrastructure cost. Going further, what is bond floating expenditure? Bond floating expenditure is a bond floating. अगर अपन bond floating को समझे तो ऐसे bond जिसके interest rate, coupon rate हमेशा fluctuate होते रहते हैं. तो इसका कैसे import होता है services का? Generally, bond floating expenditure is an expenditure which though appropriately recorded in the books of account, skips the tension and applicable taxes are not discharged, often in respect of the same. Therefore, the concerned auditor should thoroughly inspect the books of account and identify all the payment in foreign currency for compliance with these provisions. Underwriting charges. If underwriting charges are paid in the foreign currency to an underwriter who is located outside India, then GST is payable on such transactions. Appropriate ledgers, contracts, etc. should be scrutinized in details, and thereafter relevant disclosures should be made regarding taxability of the same. Generally, IT infrastructure is the common cost which the bank bear on all India basis and execute one common contract for the same. Though such contract require careful apportionment in terms of an appropriate provisions, including rules, and depending upon the nature of transaction, appropriate GST at the rate 18% is payable on such transaction. Further, credit for the GST so paid is available. Next topic we are going to discuss is ITC in the banking sector. Income tax credit is the tax. Sorry, sir. Input tax credit.
Just checking.
Input tax credit in the banking sector. What do you mean by input tax credit? Anybody want to answer?
इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट क्या होती है?
GST paid the GST on it. So the raw material you purchased, so you get tax credit from that and set up and it will pay to the government.
Not only raw materials, in fact, every capital good input services or any inputs, he can get ITC on it. Sorry. Okay. So for the banking company, ITC can be availed by using two options. As discussed by our keynote speaker, Saurabh Basis, sir, that there are two options available for the bank, which is that either it can avail 100% ITC or it can avail 50% of the eligible ITC and the rest 50% will lapse. If you are availing 50% of the ITC in a financial year, you cannot withdraw from it. Okay. Next, the restriction of 50% shall not apply to tax paid on supplies made by one registered person to another registered person having same PAN, which means that if a bank is providing services to its branches, it does not mean that a 50% eligible ITC आप ले सकते हो. इसमें आपको 100% ITC ही लेना पड़ेगा जो बैंक सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड कर रही है. So summary. Claim of credit by a banking company, financial institution, or NBFC company or an institution choose to avail every month 50% eligible input tax credit on inputs, capital good and input services in that month. Company or institution shall not avail credit of tax paid for non-business purposes or credit attributable to supply specified in subsection 5 of section 15 in form GSTR2, which is block credits. Company or institution shall avail restriction of 50% shall not the restriction of 50% shall not apply the credit of tax paid the supply is made by one registered person to another registered person having the same PAN. 50% of the remaining ITC shall be admissible and shall be input tax credit admissible to the company or institution, and the balance amount of ITC shall be reversed in form of GSTR 3B. Like I would like to explain this with an example. अगर अपने पास 1 लाख रुपए की ITC है, ठीक है, तो अपने GSTR 2 में दिख रहा है कि अपन 1 लाख रुपए की अपने पास ITC है, बट GSTR 3B में दिखेगा कि अपन ने 50,000 ही अवेल करी है, ठीक है. बट फिर अगर अपन रिकंसाइल करने जाएंगे अगर GSTR 3B और GSTR 2 को, तो वो रिकंसाइल नहीं होंगे. तो अपन क्या करेंगे, GSTR 3B में 1 लाख की ही ITC अवेल करेंगे और 50,000 का अपन रिवर्सल ले लेंगे. तो नॉर्मली वो 50,000 का ही दिखाएगा कि अपने ITC 50,000 की लिए, बट एक तरीके से सेटलमेंट होके दिखाएगा. तो GSTR 3B खुद ही को जस्टिफाई कर देगा. फिर next, reversal of credit for bank and financial institution including NBFC. Relevant provisions has been amended to exclude banks and financial institution including NBFC engaged in providing services by way of extending deposit, loans or advance from its ambit. It has been provided in the said explanation that the value of reversal of common ITC taken on input and input services used in providing taxable and exempted services shall not include the value of services by way of extending deposit, loan or advance against consideration in the form of interest or discount. Next is apportionment of credit according to section number 1 and section number 17(2). अपॉर्चुनिटी ऑफ क्रेडिट्स मतलब आईटीसी अपन जब भी अवेल करेंगे जब वो बैंकिंग और जीरो रेटेड सप्लाईज पर है. जीरो रेटेड सप्लाईज आप लोग जानते हैं एसईजेड यूनिट्स और डेवलपर पे लगती है और एक्सपोर्ट सर्विसेज पे लगती है. So goods and services are used by the registered taxable person as under partly for business purposes and partly for other purpose, partly for effecting taxable supplies and including zero-rated supplies and partly for effecting exempt supplies. In such cases, ITC shall be allowed to the extent attributable to business purpose or taxable supplies including zero-rated supplies as the case may be in. What is the value of exempt supplies? Value of exempt supplies shall include, according to section number 17(3) of CGST Act, supply under RCM, transaction security, and sale of land. Next is manner of determination of ITC in respect of input services, and its reversal thereof. As per Rule 42, there is a formula. There's a formula for from which you can calculate it. As per the Rule 42, reversal is required for the portion of common credit which is attributable to exempt supplies or for non-business use. Common credit means that the part of ITC which cannot be identified, especially to taxable supplies included zero-rated or exempt supplies or non-business rather than commonly used for taxable supplies, exempt supplies, and for non-business use. A formula has been prescribed to determine the eligible ITC to be taken, removing the ITC attributable to exempt supplies or used for non-business use. Let us have a view on a formula where E means exempted turnover, taxable turnover included zero-rated supply. अगर अपन दोनों को प्लस करेंगे तो total turnover आएगा, which is F. T1 is purely personal supply, which is non-business purpose. Next is for purely exempted supply, T2. T3 is for non-eligible ITC. T4 is normal taxable supply included zero-rated supplies. Step 1, we have to calculate the electronic credit ledger में कितना ITC जाएगा. तो C1 कैसे calculate होगा? Total turnover minus T1, T2, T1 plus T2 minus T3. And common credit कैसे find होगा? जो अपन ने भी C1 निकाला है इलेक्ट्रॉनिक क्रेडिट लेजर वाला, उसमें से अपन माइनस कर देंगे नॉर्मल टैक्सेबल सप्लाई इंक्लूडिंग जीरो रेटेड सप्लाई. However, ITC attributable towards exempt supply, which is D1, is calculated as E divide F into C2. C2 is common credit, जो तीनों में distribute होने वाला है. Next is step 4. D2 अपन निकालेंगे, which is non-business purpose, which is 5% of the C2. C2 is common credit. Step 5, C3. C3 is calculated as common credit minus D1 plus D2. D1 and D2 is the reversal amount which we need to do in the input tax credit.
Do you have any example of this?
Yes. Okay. So let us have a look at an example. If the total input tax during the tax period is 10 lakh, which is T, total T. ITC for purely non-business purpose is T1. Purely exempted supply is T2. T3 is non-eligible ITC, which is 30,000. ITC for taxable and business activity, which is T4, which is 7 lakh. We have to calculate common credit available to electronic credit ledger. तो अपन कैसे calculate करेंगे? 10 lakh में से T1, T2, T3 minus कर देंगे. तो अपने पास common credit, credit available in electronic credit ledger आ जाएगा. फिर कॉमन क्रेडिट निकालने के लिए जो अपन ने अभी अमाउंट निकाला इलेक्ट्रॉनिक क्रेडिट में जितना भी अमाउंट था अपने पास उसमें से अपन माइनस कर देंगे T4 अमाउंट व्हिच इज ITC फॉर टैक्सेबल एंड बिजनेस एक्टिविटी व्हिच इज कॉमन क्रेडिट 1,20,000 आ जाएगा. अब अपने पास F दे रखा और E दे रखा है. F दे रखा अपन को 20 lakhs and E दे रखा है 15 lakhs. We have to calculate D1 now, which is calculated as E divide F into C2 is D1. D2 is 5% of C2, which is 6,000. The value of amount to be reversed is D1 plus D2. Okay. Last, if the final amount of ITC reversal and the proportionate amount of input credit reversal is greater, then such amount need to be added to the output tax liability and interest need to be paid on such excess amount according to section number 50. If final amount of ITC is less than the provisional amount of input tax reversal, then such amount shall be claimed as credit within 6 months from the end of the financial year to which such credit relates. Thank you. So,
Yeah, the quiz can be started by the quiz master, and in the meantime, I request Saurabh ji to please, if you want to further elaborate the discussion which has been done by RG.
So I think, sir, she has fairly covered everything in detail. Only thing in the last slide, I think it was mentioned September, right? So that deadline has been extended to 30th of November for claiming the credit. I think that is something which is amended.
Okay.
Actually, she keeps on checking everyone whether he is correct or not. So the quiz now, I have already shared the link for the quiz. Yes, our quiz master can share the details of the quiz on the screen also. So we are given another 10 seconds so that all others can also join. To 5 more seconds.
You can now
Yeah, you can now start the quiz. Who is liable to pay tax? इतना सारा हिंदी सवाल बोल गए इसमें तो 100 से आंसर होना चाहिए. Time is up. 88 could answer, 94 में से. And then now Lokis, Urmi and Mano are leading the board. Quiz number 2. As common credit can be calculated as for our technical system. This time Harshvardhan, Garv, which of these is true? So, बनाई करो So Garv, Morata, Lokis and Urmi Jawar are leading the board this time. But पिछली बार कौन कौन थे? True. Located in India. Garv location Harshvardhan. 87 को answer था. 5 balls. This is the last one. So Garv, Lokis and Harshvardhan, Harshvardhan. Nice. You can continue with your presentation now. Yeah. And we will see. All are requested to be there in the last quiz also, so that and after that we shall announce that who are the winners. And as and when they are coming for the next quiz, please write your answer, write your name, same as it was there in the report in the earlier quiz. Yes.
So continuing further, as my teammates have explained, I would continue it with the routine procedural checks which are to be done under the GST regime in the banking sector. So starting with what are the payment dates? In case of banks, GST shall be remitted by 20th of the next month. For the deposit, for depositing the GST, a challan has to be filed in Form GST PMT 6, which is valid for 15 days from the date of generation. If in any case the person is unable to pay, or is in case there is failure to pay tax or part of it to the government within the stipulated time, or excess claim of ITC is taken, or there is excess reduction in output tax liability, there's an interest penalty of 18%. For the issuance of tax invoice, there's a time limitation which has been prescribed in Rule 47. For the issuance of service, issue of invoice for services, time limitation is for 30 days from the supply. But Provision 1 of Rule 47 states that insurance company, banking company, financial institution, for these all three, the date of issuance of tax invoice has been extended to 45 days. As per the Provision 2 of Rule 47, an insurer, banking company, financial institution, which includes NBFC, a telecom operator, and as the class may be specified, may make invoice at the time of recording in the books of accounts or before the expiry of quarter from the date of supply made. Then, as per Rule 46, these are the information.
Banking sector, these are the exceptions or changes which are different from the normal provisions of the Act. So different time limits are also provided for raising the invoices.
Moving further, as per Rule 46, these are the few informations which are to be contained in the tax invoice. Starting with, there should be name, address, and GST and of the supplier. There should be a serial number, which can be a combination of any characters, but not exceeding 16 characters. There should be date of issuance. If the recipient is registered, then the name, address, GSTIN or UIN shall also be mentioned. And if the recipient is unregistered, it may be mentioned if he demands for the same. But if the value of supply, taxable value, is more than 50,000, then the name, address of recipient, and the address of supply with state and its code shall be mentioned. Then the HSN code shall be mentioned. HSN code is based on the annual turnover in the previous year. If the annual turnover was up to 5 crores, then the HSN code should be 4 digits. And if it's exceeding 5 crores, then HSN code up to 6 digits is required. Then the description of goods and services shall be included. Quantity in case of goods and units. Total value of supply, taxable value of supply, which should be after considering the discounts and abatements. Rate of tax, amount of tax to be charged, place of supply, and if in case the place of supply is different from the address of delivery, it shall also be mentioned. Whether tax is payable on reverse charge basis, and finally the signature or the digital signature of the supplier or his authorized representative. Moving further, tax invoice in case of special services. When the supplier of taxable service is an insurer or a banking company or a FI, which includes an NBFC, the said supplier may issue a consolidated tax invoice by whatever name at the end of the month for the supplies that are made during the month, whether issued or made available physically or electronically, whether or not serially numbered, and whether or not containing the address of recipient, but it must contain the other information as mentioned in Rules 46. Then, in case of export of goods and services, as discussed, the information under Rule 46, those informations shall be included. Other than that, the invoice shall carry an endorsement. When the supply is affected by payment of IGST, there should be an endorsement which states that supply meant for export to SEZ units for authorized operation on payment of integrated tax. And when such supply is not affected, is affected without payment of IGST, it should carry an endorsement which says supply meant for export to SEZ or SEZ developer for authorized operation under bond or letter of undertaking without payment of integrated tax. Moving further, we have returns which are to be filed in GST. Starting with, we have GSTR 3B, which is a monthly summary or quarterly in case of if the person has opted for QRMP scheme, which is a quarterly return, monthly payments. The due date is 20th of next month. If the person is opted for QRMP scheme, it's 20th or 22nd of the next month succeeding such quarter based on the state. It is applicable to all person, but it does other than ISD, person liable to deduct TDS and personally liable to collect tax at source. Then the next form is GSTR 1. If the outward supplies are more than 5 crore, the due date is 11th of next month. If it is less than 5 crores, then it is 13th of the month succeeding the quarter. It is applicable to normal and regular taxpayers. Then we have IFF, which is Invoice Furnishing Facility. The due date for the same is 13th of next month. It is only applicable to the taxpayers who have opted for QRMP scheme. Then we have GSTR 6. It is a monthly return for input service distributor. The due date for the same is 13th of next month. It is applicable to input service distributor. We'll be discussing input service distributors further in this presentation. Then we have GSTR 9, which is the annual return. The due date for the same is 31st December of the next financial year. It is applicable to normal taxpayers of voluntary filing of GSTR 9 in case of turnover not exceeds 2 crore in previous financial year. Then we have GST at 9C, annual return along with copy of audited annual accounts and a reconciliation statement. The due date for the same is 31st December of the next financial year. It is applicable to normal taxpayers having aggregate turnover of more than 5 crores. Then we have the obligation to furnish information return. Banking companies must maintain record and submit an information return which contains all the detailed transactions under GST. The information return must be as per the specified format and be submitted to the designated authority. If the information return is defective, the entity has the power to rectify the issue within 30 days. If it does not rectify the same within the prescribed time, it incurs a penalty of ₹100 per day up to 5,000. In case of non-submission, the authority may issue an invoice notice allowing 90 days for compliance. If the compliance with the issue is necessary to avoid further penalties or legal consequences. Then we have GST registration. GST registration, we have the threshold limit for Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, and Tripura. For both goods and services, the threshold limit is aggregate turnover up to 10 lakhs. For Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Sikkim, Assam, Puducherry, Telangana, and Uttarakhand, for both goods and services, the aggregate turnover is up to 20 lakhs. For the other remaining states, which includes Gujarat and Maharashtra, for the supplies, the aggregate turnover threshold limit is 20 lakhs, and for goods, the aggregate turnover is up to 40 lakhs. Then we have voluntary registration. Even if the turnover is not exceeding the threshold, you can opt for voluntary registration. Then effective date of registration. If the application is made within 30 days, then the effective date of registration is the date on which the business becomes live. Then if the application is submitted after 30 days, in such case, the effective date of registration is the date which the application is approved and the registration is granted by tax authorities. Then we have suo motu registration. In case when registration initiated by tax authorities due to surveys, inspections, or other proceedings, the effective date of registration is the date specified in order of registration issued by the authorities. Then we have the topic which is ISD, which has also been discussed by our keynote speaker, Saurabh sir. So I would like to explain it with the help of example first. We'll brief it first and then I'll move to the content. So in this example, there's an ABC bank which has its HO in Mumbai, and its operational units during the financial year are in Mumbai, Delhi, and Jaipur. So if in case ABC Limited, the Mumbai HO branch, takes some services which is used only in Mumbai, then the input tax credit shall be availed only for Mumbai. But if there's a service which is availed by Mumbai branch, but it is used by all the other 3 units, then in that case, that the input credit must be distributed within the units of operation. So here, ABC Bank furnishes following information in the month of July 2017 and asks for permission to distribute the below input tax credit to various branches. First, we have CGST paid on services, which is used only in Mumbai unit. Then this credit shall only be used by the Mumbai HO branch. Then we have IGST, CGST, SGST paid on services, which is used by all units, which is 12 lakhs. So this type of credit, which is used by all, on the service which is used by all 3 units, this credit is to be distributed in all 3 units on the basis of their turnover in the preceding financial year. Credit, we should note that the credit is to be distributed in pro rata basis on the basis of turnover of all 3 units. Then understanding what is an ISD. As per section 2, subsection 61 of CGST Act, ISD means an office or of a supplier of goods or services or both, which receives tax invoices towards receipts, input services, and issued a prescribed document for the purpose of disputing the credit, which is paid on said services to the taxable supplier of taxable goods or both, having the same pen as that of ISD. Then for the registration of ISD, is an ISD is required to obtain a separate registration. The registration is mandatory and there is no threshold limit for the registration for an ISD. The other locations may be registered separately. Then we have the manner of distribution of such credits in various units. For the purpose of distributing the input tax credit, an ISD has to issue a ISD invoice as prescribed in Rule 54, subsection 1 of the CGST Rules 2017, which clearly indicates in such invoice that it is issued only for distribution of input tax credit. The ISD officer must issue a form GSTR 6 which provides all the details of distribution in the same. Further, ISD shall separately distribute both the amounts for ineligible and eligible tax credits. Then moving forward, there's a questionnaire for GST audit in banks. This is a basic questionnaire which is to be followed during the GST audit of bank. First, it is divided in 3 parts, Part A, Part B, Part C, and Part G. So starting with Part A is the basic details of an assessee. These should be taken into consideration. It states that name of supplier or recipient of service, full address, or if multiple GST registrations are obtained, valid period of registration in case of casual person or an NRI, N of assessee, list of principal sources of revenue, which should be bifurcated in taxable, exempted, and non-GST supplies. List of principal revenue bifurcate. Is there any change in activities during the year as compared to the immediate preceding year? Whether same is included, whether if there are any changes, it shall be included in the registration. Whether taxpayer has maintained accounts and records in terms of Section 35 and 36 of CGST Act, which are read along with Rule 56 to 58 of CGST rules. Then there Part B tells about the questionnaire for the exemption available under CGST, SGST, or IGST. Then the questionnaire should be a broad description of nature of income. Are services provided outside India? If yes, specify the nature and amount involved. Broad description of exempted supplies. If there are exempted supplies, the amount involved should be provided. Whether any services are recovered in addition to interest on loan, advance, or deposits, such as locker rent, folio charges, are exigible to GST. Whether bank is trading in commercial paper, certificate of deposit. If yes, whether any separate charges are collected and GST is paid on the same, and we should provide the details about that. Whether GST is levied on late fees charges collected from credit card holders. If yes, whether GST is being paid on the same, and details. Then we should check whether the transaction of purchase of sale of foreign currency is amongst banks or authorized dealers. If no, then it's taxable. Check whether the value of supply is in relation to purchase or sale of foreign currency, including money changing, is determined in term of Rule 32, subsection 2. Details of any repossessed good and valuation criteria for arriving at purchase value of such goods. Then in respect of RCM, we have 2 questions which explains a broad description of taxable service which are received for which tax is to be paid on reverse charge mechanism. Whether payment requirement of GST under RCM has been complied. Whether GST has been paid on advances paid by bank to the specified registered person under Section 9 of CGST Act, such as sponsorship services. Whether in respect of each inward supply where no tax has been paid, is there a clear disclosure made to auditor as to the reason for the tax position taken in each case. Then in respect of payments, whether the payment and ledger entries are made in terms of CGST Act and payment rules. If tax is paid belatedly, specify interest paid on delayed payment under Section 50 of CGST Act. Whether RCM tax liability is not discharged by utilizing the accumulated ITC. Then in respect of ITC, we have few questions which states that whether ITC is taken utilized, which is matching with books of accounts and GST returns, which we'll be seeing in Annexure 1. If answer of A is negative, report differences. Whether ITC taken utilized utilized on input services, inputs, and credit capital goods. Is the CGST Act read with the CGST rules? Whether the head office has not availed depreciation on amount of GST on the capital goods on which ITC has been availed. List of major input services on which company takes ITC. Whether it complies with CGST Act. Whether credit has been reversed for each month an amount equal to 50% of the ITC availed on input services and capital goods has been reversed in respect of exempted supplies on actual basis. Check whether credit of taxes paid under RCM is availed in the same month. If no, then it should be then ensure ITC is availed within the prescribed time. Whether any credit has been availed on invoice or credit notes after 30th November of the subsequent financial year or furnishing of the relevant annual return, whichever is later. Then we should ensure that branch or HO maintains details of ITC availed. Then whether an amount equal to the ITC availed by recipient added to output tax liability of supplier along with interest where the recipient fails to pay supplier of goods an amount towards value of supply along with tax payable within 180 days from the issue of invoice. Then in respect of ISD, input service distributor, month-wise amount distribution, if there is month-wise amount distribution of ITC, if assessee is registered as ISD together with the address of units to which it is distributed, amount of ITC received from ISD, if any, together with address of units for which it is received. Whether ITC distributed in compliance with Section 20 of CGST Act. If no, then the discrepancy in distribution and the reason thereof shall be stated. If every ISD shall for every calendar month furnish a return in Form GSTR 6 electronically within the prescribed time period. Then in case of export of services, whether conditions for export of supply or services is satisfied to avail benefit of export services without payment of tax, such benefit is subject to furnishing of LUT bond. Is payment of service exported received by the supplier provided in convertible foreign currency within the time period prescribed by RBI? And then other than those we have discussed above, there are few questions that treatment of transactions between HO, regional office and zonal offices, whether the registered person has filed the applicable return on timely basis, whether IGST has been paid on import of services, whether tax wrongfully collected and paid to central or state government. If yes, state the details of such transactions. Now we have a few annexures to look upon. We have first to have a reconciliation of turnover for the year. You can have a look at it. In this, we basically reconcile the credits in the statement of P&L to the total value, taxable value in Form GSTR1. I'll give you a minute to have a look on it. If you have any questions, you can ask. Shall I move further? Then we have Annexure B, which states about the discharge of liabilities. This is basically how the liability has been discharged for CGST, SGST, IGST, and CES. This states the liabilities for the month and the credit which is utilized for paying those liabilities. You can have a look at it. Moving further, we have Annexure C, which states about the details of input tax credit, in which goods and services on which ITC is eligible, and goods of which is bifurcated in goods and services on which ITC is available, and on those with which ITC is ineligible. Then we have out of total of the first paragraph, eligible credits on supplies received from related person or distinct persons. Moving further, we have ITC reversal, which contains the details about the tax credit paid as output tax liability, which was reclaimed during the year. Please have a look at it. The second part of ITC reversal contains about the details of amount of tax credit paid as tax output tax liability, which was reclaimed during the year. And then we have last annexure, which states the transaction in which incorrect tax credit was paid. In this annexure involves all those incorrect taxes paid and appropriate tax that should be payable and the refund which is to be reclaimed. Thank you.
This is the third and last link.